Howdy, howdy. Sue Devil here, and welcome to my series on improvements for the Total War Warhammer series. This is really from a Dowie, a dwarf perspective, but it really encompasses a number of improvements I'd love to see go into the Mortal Empires campaign, or at least the Game 3 campaign. And I really want to. This is definitely a series. It's too big to put it into one little video. And for anyone who doesn't know, I mean, I've really played a lot of the dwarf campaigns in Game 1, and now finished a complete campaign in Mortal Empires. I'm a longtime player of the Total War series, and I've loved it since the first medieval Total War, and a long-time fan of the Games Workshop Warhammer fantasy franchise. And really my introduction to that was pretty late and it came in Warhammer Online, but I'm a massive fan of the lore, the comedy, the artwork is amazing, and all these suggestions are really just my own thoughts combined with thoughts from other YouTubers that I've heard, and really wanted to put everything together in a package to lay them out, and hopefully foster discussion, and hopefully really be interesting to people who like to think about not only something that's a great product and a great merging of two amazing IPs, but the things that we can do to improve on what's already great. And there's always room for improvement. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I think the very first thing I want to define as I go through this is really the improvement principles that I think that are important to adhere to when thinking about improvements and or changes to gameplay or mechanics, in order to evaluate them as to whether they're really improvements or not, or whether they should go into the game or would be worthwhile to think about. And I really don't have many. I think this series has really hit the sweet spot between making a game that has enough strategic depth to be really fun for people who like strategy games, yet it is accessible enough to a wider audience so that more people can get into the game and play it. And I think that's a hard line to balance on. Some of the older games were much more complex, and a lot more strategy, and if you look at some other games out there in the ether, they're incredibly deep strategically, but they're completely inaccessible to most people. They can't even start to play them, even if they like them. I mean, there's some World War II games that are really amazing, but they're so deep that a lot of people, they're intimidating. They're not even you're not even able to start a game, even though they would like to enjoy it. And that's the balance that I think Total War Warhammer is walking. And they're doing a really good job of it so far, and I'd like to see that continue to improve. So the three real principles that I think should be the foundation for improving this game as a whole are: number one, when we make a change or suggest a change or think about an element we'd like into the game or like remove from the game, we just need to ask ourselves, does it make the game or the game element more fun, or more satisfying, or more exciting? And these three things are a little different, and they're kind of synonymous in strategy games, but really the first principle is, will it make the game more fun? And this is really the departure from the classic Total War series, the historical series, where part of the fun is the deep strategy and is, the difficult aspects of it, whereas this is more of a fantasy. This is not more. It is exactly a fantasy game, and part of the fun of the game is not being as harsh, I suppose. Being really humorous, being funny, and enjoying the campaign. It's not as mentally taxing, but it's just enough to really enjoy the strategic side of it. So the first question we should always ask is, will this make the game more fun? The second one is, does it add strategic depth to the game while maintaining or increasing simplicity or intuitiveness? And I think that's an important question to always ask in a game that's really on the line, that's really balancing these elements, is can you add strategic depth while making the game or that element more intuitive so that it makes more sense to anyone who's picking up the game, or it's even while being more strategically deep, increasing the simplicity. And those things, again, may sound like they're counterintuitive, but they really aren't. And the last principle is, does it reduce the tedium of the game or the mental overhead? And this is something that I think Warhammer 2 has done a fantastic job of in terms of an incremental improvement over Game 1, is reducing the tedium or the mental overhead of the game so that it is easier to manage your empire. It is reduce some of the less fun elements of the game, and it scales really nicely as your empire grows. They've done a really great job on that, but I think there's definitely some other elements they can make pretty big improvements on. So those are the basic principles that I'm thinking about, and really there may be more in there, and I may expand on them a little bit, but really those are the first three things that I want to think about as I'm suggesting these improvements, which are really from a Dowie, a dwarf perspective, and we'll move on from there. Now, the very first thing I would love to see improved in the game, and it's quite simple but I think impactful, is to increase the amount of information given to the player at all levels. And the first one is really when you look at your difficulty setting. I think with a couple paragraphs in each difficulty setting, it would make it simpler to understand what you're getting into. You put it on normal, it should say below something simple like, this is how the game was balanced and intended to be played. Very simple note which makes sense. You put it on easy, you could put a little blurb saying your army in this mode is more prepared for combat than all the other armies in the old world. They're ready to create a better Karazhan Corps, and some of the quick buffs that your army gets and the AI armies, the debuffs the AI armies get. And I really think it's important to be open about these things. I hear, especially on Legendary, players complaining that the computer cheats, and I'm like, it's really, I don't know what to think about that. But I think a blurb here when you're playing on Legendary saying, you take over this faction in a dark time where you're not trusted by your allies, you're not even fully trusted by your own kin, and therefore your armies cost a lot more to field because no one believes that the fight can be won, etc., etc. A few little things explaining what Legendary means and why it means that. So it doesn't even have to be that great, it just has to be plausible, along with some of the debuffs that you get. Example, your armies cost more, your armies are less effective in combat, the AI armies have a big head start, so they have a lot more effectiveness in combat, and this sort of thing. So I think really that's the first thing I'd really like to see is a simple addition, and you have room for it. You can make it very clear why these difficulty settings do what they do, and just an easier introduction to the game for a new player so they can switch on these difficulties and see what's going to happen when they play. I also wouldn't mind a little mouse over that. If you click on the initial challenge, not click on it, but if you mouse over easy, why is it easy? A good example is the dwarves are a very easy starting point because they have very defensible locations. They have nearby settlements which generate a lot of income. These types of things. You could put a little mouse over that's not in the way. It's not going to get in anyone's way unless you mouse over it, and you can see and have explained to you why the initial challenge is rated the way it is. And I think that's another clean, easy way to increase the intuitiveness of the game and just make it that much better for a new player coming in, and have a better explanation for experienced players. One of the things that I really want to see in the next game particularly is a much more open explanation of why things are the way they are, so that it makes sense to anyone who wants to find out, and you can make sense of that in your mind. Like I said, even if someone will look at that reason, oh, that's BS, it doesn't matter, as long as it's plausible and reasonable and it's easy to put in there. So that's really the first basic improvement I'd like to see. Now, we get on to the next one, which is really a big one, and it's something that I've thought about for a very long time. I'd love to see more of this in the first Medieval, many years ago, and I know this has been suggested many times over the years, or some form of this, but seeing what CA has done with the sort of ability to change unit sizes with that little Skaven pack and everything else like that, I think they're on their way, and I would love to see this implemented, and that would be a little customize button. You just put it, maybe you can put it on here, customize campaign. You click on that button and it opens up a whole new screen, and you have a little blurb, a little explanation on top saying the campaign has been balanced around the initial settings, but this allows you to change a number of settings inside the game to customize your campaign. This would be a massive improvement. Again, it would not add complexity for a new player. They look at this, they want an easy challenge, they understand what their difficulty level is giving them, and they see a customized button, they click on it, and they're like, holy crap, I don't I don't know what that is, and you could just have a click, go back, and they can just leave it, and there's a good explanation that a new player will be okay with, saying this is how the game was balanced as intended to be played, but if you'd like to customize your campaign, you can make these changes. And within that customization, there are, of course, a lot of potential options, but the ones that I would really like to see is a very simple set of choices for factions as a whole, races as a whole, and some gameplay elements. So, for example, I'd like to see a list of all the major factions and all the minor factions, and I'd like to be able to click down on them and say, do I want to make them a little weaker, a lot weaker, a little stronger, or a lot stronger, which would do two things. It would give their starting armies more chevrons or less chevrons, and it would give their economy, an increase in X percent, an X percent increase per building, plus a bonus to their initial starting income. These types of things. That way you could go and you could say, I want all of the major factions increased or decreased, or I want to go and click on every single individual faction myself and change them, or I want some minor faction that, like Talea or something like that, and I want them to be incredibly strong and everyone around them to be weak. Whatever you want. It's so easy to do in terms of, all you have to do is... and I love making their army stronger or weaker by simply adding or subtracting chevrons. And this is something I'm going to get to, but I think there should be a negative chevron like as maybe some kind of red X to show that your armies are relatively unprepared, so they get not bonuses but debuffs because they're quickly put together or whatever. And the game already does that. When you're on legendary, you get a debuff to all your own units, which is really equivalent to chevrons, but I'd like to see that made obvious. I'd like to see it made so you can see it in campaign, and what you see in terms of stats is what it actually is, instead of any hidden bonuses. I think that's one of the things that really gets the goat of players who say, oh, well, the computer's cheating, is they don't know precisely what the buffs are, and they may disagree with it if they see, oh, well, I have, on legendary, I start with -5 chevrons, but you can see where you're at relative to your opponents, and you can catch up because there is a maximum amount of chevrons. Maybe you start at -5 or -3 or whatever it is, but you can, through effort and focus, you can bring all your armies up to that 9 + 9 chevrons or whatever. But I would like to see that ability to go and change every single individual faction, even the non-player factions. I'd like to see them grouped by, say, Dawi or Empire, Bretonnian Kingdoms, Undead, that sort of thing. And I'd also like a few key singular changes in terms of things that you can add or take out of the campaign. For example, I'd like to be able to turn off the Chaos Invasion. So I'd like a little button where it says Chaos Invasion, just on or off, and then one further, which is to make it harder. And you could put 5 elements in there, make it on, off, or a normal, easy, hard, very hard, and legendary. I don't really, I don't think you need that many, but really the ability to turn the Chaos Invasion off and on. I would also like the ability to turn confederations off and on. Very simple, easy enough to do, and you can complete that in a simple set of master campaign elements. I would also like to turn off and on greenskin invasion. So kind of an element I'd like is that once the greenskins are gone, like say there's 4 major legendary lords, and Azeg and Wurzeg and Grimgor, Ironhide, and Skarsnik, that once they're off the campaign, if you have this on, 20 to 50 turns later, they will come back into campaign with a WA, maybe 6 stacks or something like that, in a randomized location, and they will come back into your campaign, and that can happen for each of the 4 legendary lords, and you could turn it off, or maybe it's default off. You can turn it on and make it harder or really hard, that type of thing, so you could add to your campaign. I'd like the same sort of slider or discrete changes for Beastmen. I think I have a lot of improvement suggestions for Beastmen in general. I think they are a fantastic faction in terms of their artwork and what they can add to a campaign. I think in campaign presently they just don't add a whole lot, and I'm going to have a specific video just set aside for Beastmen. But I think adding in a true Beastman invasion, default off, but if you want to turn it on, you can turn it on, or you can make it harder or easier. And the last one is Skaven. I would love to have the ability to have default off, but if I wanted to have a quote-unquote Vermintide mode where I can turn on a massive Skaven invasion, and you make it on, where just like the Chaos Invasion, maybe you get a little warning, maybe you don't. Well, you probably don't. It's Skaven. They're backstabbers, and they're sneaky, and they're got this giant under empire. They could pop up all around the world simultaneously, which is exactly what I'd like to see in at least a dozen different locations. And you would have the Skaven under Empire invasion into the old and new worlds, and you could make it again harder with more. Maybe it only happens once when you add it in there. If you make it harder, it can happen twice, and the armies will be more difficult, etc., etc. But there, with this type of screen where you can customize each and every faction in some small way by increasing their army's capability and their starting income and their income per building, whether it's positive or negative, you can really, and turning on and off correct confederations, you really can customize a campaign to make it much more interesting. Maybe there's a lore reason or an army you'd love to see come out of the woodworks that's, like Kislev. Maybe you turn Kislev all the way up and you'd like to see Kislev be a massive empire and turn off the Chaos Invasion or whatever. It has a lot of potential and it's easy to do, I think, relatively speaking, because you're just going to be modifying the base incomes of each of these settlements, the starting chevrons. You start with +3 or +2 or -2, which I think instead of having hidden bonuses, that should be the positive and negative bonus for each faction. And of course, it is also scalable in that you can continually add little options into this type of screen. It can have 2 or 3 pages, it doesn't really matter, because as a new player, you maybe, like I said, you click on it, you're like, holy crap. Yeah, I'm not even going to touch this. I'm just going to play the game how it was meant to be played. For an experienced player, it adds a ton of replayability, a lot of scope to have a lot of fun, and to create your own world, your own campaign, to your own enemies. You could even put in there a diplomacy setting where all Dawi love each other, or they all hate each other, or whatever you want to do. You could make factions really like other factions or dislike other factions, including races, more or less, depending on what you want to do. So really, that is the first installment of what I want to talk about in terms of game improvements, campaign improvements for I'd like to see some of this stuff in Mortal Empires. I doubt that a screen like that would be put into Mortal Empires. If it was going to be implemented, it would probably be implemented in third game, but I'd love to see it right now, because just with that one small thing, you hit go, and then before you hit start campaign, it says this will lock in your custom settings. Are you sure? Yes. And then you can go ahead and start your campaign with all the settings that you put in there locked in. And if you don't like the way that campaign played out, you can go and tweak it for your next campaign. It just has a lot of scope for a lot of fun and a lot of interesting gameplay that is really customized to what a player wants to experience. And maybe you even have a Skaven mode where you randomize everything and you don't know exactly what everything's going to be until you get into the campaign. Who knows? Like it has a lot of potential and a lot of scalability for increasing the number of playthroughs you can do, the number of interesting campaigns you can watch and experience. So that's my first installment. That's all I wanted to talk about in the first installment, because there's a lot of other improvements I'd like to see made, but a lot of them really hinge on the ability to turn things off or turn them on, and make it, again, achieve that balance where you can make the game more complex while maintaining or increasing simplicity. So this is a good example of, you have a little customize button. If you're a new player, you don't even touch it. You just, you can mouse over it. It says standard, and so you can go in and customize it if you want to, but this is how if you play on standard, this is how the game was balanced and meant to be played. So you can just choose to ignore it completely as a new player, or as someone who's just not interested in that level of depth. You just ignore it and you play the game. And it adds a massive amount of options for all types of players. So that's the first video in the series. I'm I mean, I don't even know how many I'm going to have. I've been writing notes for a very long time, and I thought I really did try to focus on writing notes during the Mortal Empires campaign as to things, while they popped into my head, as what I'd like to see improved. I did make a small video on the Skaven because I think they really need to be improved vastly and in a hurry to make the Mortal Empires campaign a lot better. But anyways, I will be making a bunch more, and I'm hoping to have some discussions and to see some of the interesting things that you guys have to say about the campaign, or what you'd like to see as a viewer or as a player, and what you think would be very good improvements to campaign in general. Love to hear from you. I mean, comments are something that I absolutely love. No matter what they are, negative or positive, or just funny, or whatever. This is something that I really enjoy, is hearing everyone's comments and to have deeper discussions, and even debates on elements of gameplay and things that could be done to improve the Mortal Empires and broader Total War Warhammer experience. So hope you found it interesting, and I really look forward to hearing any comments. And other than that, I will continue to make this series, and we'll see you soon. So have a good one.